Today's guest is Ralph Booth, founder of Osin and creator of The Loop, the world's most advanced circadian table light. Ralph's personal struggle with sleep and exhaustion led him to explore the critical role of light and how it regulates our internal clocks. With modern lifestyles these days keeping us indoors for extended periods of time, it's no surprise that an estimated 87% of office workers suffer from social jet lag, which is a form of circadian disruption, which the majority of shift workers are also suffering from. The Loop spectrum is designed to combat this issue and is the only one in the world that follows the recommendations for circadian light as set out in the report titled Recommendations for Daytime, Evening and Nighttime Indoor Light Exposure to Best Support Physiology, Sleep and Wakefulness in Healthy Adults. So if your job involves working indoors, especially in an environment that receives very little natural light, then Ralph's incredible desktop invention might be just what you've been searching for to help you. I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Ralph as he shares his personal journey and how Osen is transforming how we think about light and health. Hi everyone, welcome back to today's episode of the Healthy Shift Worker podcast. So today we have Ralph Booth, who is joining us all the way from Auckland in New Zealand. So welcome, Ralph.
Thank you, Audra. Just correction, I'm actually in Nelson, New Zealand, so yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, wrong part of
Wrong
island. Oh, the wrong island as well. Whoops. Okay, so in Nelson. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today, Ralph, which is why I wanted to get you on to have a bit of a chat about all things that, related to lighting and circadian disruption and so forth. But would you mind sharing a little bit about your personal journey, your background, and what, I guess, led to for you to be doing what you're doing now?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's pivotal to the whole conversation, actually. I've worked in lighting for 25 years, and when I say lighting, generally commercial lighting. And I've always been a great one to try and learn as much as I can about the subject that I'm involved in. And when I say I work in lighting, I've been in business for 20 years, and we work on projects primarily with electrical engineers and architects. And I could say that I'm in a position of influence over the visual lighting results we have in projects. And that's certainly been a big part of my career. And part of that learning, I started going to conferences overseas and learning more and more about the subject of light and its impact on people. When I started my career, it was just the visual field, and we were very focused on having enough light so that people can work effectively when whatever business they're in or work they're in.
Yeah.
But on my journey of learning, I started learning about the other impacts of light, the biological impacts of light, and the circadian side of it. And I started realizing that my industry and the buildings that we're providing aren't actually delivering that light that we need. We can do it if we have good daylight integration into our buildings, but the very fact of how modern lighting has evolved means we can build buildings way cheaper if they don't have a lot of daylight integration. The cost of land in cities allowed us to build, these buildings that are multi-story, deep plan offices, and people are working all day, every day, away from that natural light. And the statistics are scary about how many of us are spending a majority of our time under artificial light. And artificial light does have some dirty secrets. So I started trying to influence at a project level, talking to architects and engineers, and with some interest about the need for us to start addressing. So that the thing is, we can address the circadian need with artificial light. And some people seem to think LED light is the big evil, but what I want to say is that also with LED, we can actually have just about any spectrum, that you want. We can put it in there and produce it and really start simulating, particularly the sunlight. We can pretty well simulate the visual range of sunlight. And I think that's an important aspect, but we don't. So I was on this journey, I was learning, I was starting to try and influence, and I started working, and this all happened about the same time. I started working with the engineers specifically on the new acute services hospital in Christchurch here in New Zealand. And I was working on that, and I was telling the story, hey, we in areas of need, we should be thinking about this. And the engineers, to their credit, listened, and they specified tunable lighting, so circadian light. And when I just want to say what circadian light in an artificial sense is, it's light that we can put, a high amount of low energy blue light during the day, and that works with the receptors in our eyes that contain a chemical called melanopsin that sends signals to a part of our brain that controls our body clock. And then at night we can start tuning it out and removing it. Now, about the same time, I'm saying, this timing, my partner got acute lambastic leukemia, and she ended up, I don't know, many of your listeners, you hear that leukemia, it's a horrible thing, and don't get me wrong, it is a horrible thing. It's a horrible diagnosis. And you end up she ended up in the old Christchurch Hospital in the bone marrow transplant unit. And that started a whole series of events, which culminated with when they treat you for that, they basically have to obliterate your whole lymphatic system, so all your bone marrow, and you end up with a stem cell transplant from a donor, which happened to be her older sister. And when they do that, you have zero immunity, so you end up in isolation. And I would go in and visit, so I'd go to the hospital, I'd have to wash up, and then I have to go through 2 airlocks to go and visit my partner. And and I knew that the lighting in those isolation wards that you spend weeks on end were doing nothing to align your circadian rhythm. Furthermore, there were windows looking out. It wasn't, it wasn't completely terrible, but I just knew. And they had a two-way treatment on the glass because it's on ground floor. You could look out into it, but people could walk by, but they couldn't see him, but the patients could see out.
Okay.
But I knew that was taking out all of the spectrum that you needed. So during the day, you had none of the light that I knew by this stage that we needed. And you think about it, you're now trying to recover from a transplant. So you really want every little bit of help you can have. You really want a properly timed body clock, so you're going to sleep as well as you possibly can, so that your metabolic processes are happening at the right time. And then at night, she had, in those days, these fluorescents blazing away, inappropriate, like just not being able to actually access the right light at night. So there's a really famous chronobiologist called Tul Ronenberg. You can watch some of his YouTube videos. But he talks about the homogenization of light in modern society. Well, this was the epitome of it, because you never got outside. And you had the same light day and night, and here we are we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get people well, and we can't get the lighting right. So this triggered me, and so I was working with the new acute services, and that was completed about 4 years ago. And this is another part of the problem. I can tell you that the lighting in those isolation wards there now is worse than what it was back in the old hospital, because now it is all LED. And the circadian lighting got value engineered out, and it never happened. So I thought I was in a position of influence, but I couldn't even do the influence I couldn't even influence it to get that right. And this was a trigger point for me, and this is how I started the company Osin, which stands for outside in. So bring that outside spectrum in to those areas and those people that haven't got access to it.
Yeah. Wow. No wonder with a story like that, that's definitely opened your eyes when it hits it personally like that, doesn't it? And yeah, I think it reminds me of just a conversation I had on a previous podcast with Zahid Dahaj about heliotherapy, which is using sun as a healing therapy. And apparently it was done, many, many years ago. Hospitals had balconies to put the patients outside so that they could recalibrate those circadian rhythms and also undergo a lot of the other healing benefits that sun can present. So it's fascinating, 2024, here we are.
Yeah.
Kind of going backwards, haven't we?
And just in that medical or hospital environment, do you realise if you go under anaesthetic, your circadian clock stops. So if you're in an operation for 5 hours, when you wake up, you're 5 hours now out of time, much like jet lag.
Wow.
And now if you're under artificial light trying to recover and it's homogenized, how is your body clock getting back into a regular rhythm? So the going outside if you can and getting that natural light to recover makes perfect sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are in sort of a changing time. Circadian biology is certainly getting a little bit more light on it, shining light, pardon the pun,
Yep.
on it, which is good.
It is, but just so you understand the size of the problem, less than 0.5% of new projects globally would have what I'd term circadian lighting installed in them.
Wow.
And that's so, yeah, and that's even if we just focus on the areas of need, and that is where you haven't got daylight integration. Now, I always say daylight's best, but there's just so many workplaces, buildings that we're spending all day completely removed. And when I say all day, we've got statistics. It's more than 7 hours a day and less than 15 minutes outside.
Yeah, I mean, those sorts of things you have to start questioning. That surely must be having an impact on our health, which I guess leads me to my next question, Ralph. And obviously, you've touched on the hospital scenario, which a lot of our listeners possibly work in themselves, being medical practitioners, doctors, nurses. So they are also under the brunt of that very disjointed lighting. What else have you sort of seen? Because I know that we also have a lot of people that work in call centres 24/7. And even those, even though they might be working at night, a lot of them also don't have any windows on them to begin with. What are your thoughts on the current sort of light environments there?
That we can and we need to do better. It's actually in a mess. If I'm honest with you, I mean, as a lighting industry and as far look at the way we build buildings, we're really good at doing visual light. We've been probably doing it for 120 plus years, doing artificial light so that people can work in buildings really without daylight. And if you study architecture and go back and look at architecture that was designed before that, they were really good at bringing in natural light because they had to. The problem is now we don't have to, so it is a mess and we need to do better, but unfortunately the knowledge to do this and also the way that we procure buildings are huge barriers. I think that legacy of doing visual light very well, and you must remember that we can see the results of visual light, but as far as circadian light, you may not even know the spectrum's there because of our physiology. There was no biological reason for us to be aware that we need this light. It's like breathing, it's like taking in oxygen.
Yeah.
We don't need to know. We that happens, right? And the way we evolved, it was being outside during the day, bright days and dark nights. All that in the last, 120 years has been tossed on its head. And I don't blame anyone that we're in this problem. It's just that just that we need people like you to try and get more and more of the message out there. And you're right, it is improving, but it's very slowly. Often I mention the word circadian lighting and it's often people have no idea, or even circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
It's not really something that's in the common vernacular.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it all started with the awareness, and as more and more people sort of talk about it, I know we can sort of steadily chip away at it, one day at a time.
The other thing about the shift work and all that, and we've got to do better, and I say that I'm a lighting guy and I can't recommend, other than saying the natural cycle and removing blue light on night is best, but that has a paradox in that if we do all that, people aren't as awake. They're not as alert. And if you're in a hospital context, do you want your doctor alert or do you want your doctor actually going to his natural cycle, feeling really tired? So I can't solve those problems, but I know where I can help and I can solve problems. So shift work is a real hard one. We need shift workers. It's got to happen. And I take my hat off to people that are doing shift work, but we have some problems to solve. I think there are some really interesting things happening and some really interesting research going into helping shift work, and light has a big part to play in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think whilst we have these sort of challenges in place, I guess it's empowering people to be aware of it so that they can then be a bit more proactive in how they go about their days. When they're, instead of taking their meal break or their 15-minute coffee break, instead of sitting down in the lunchroom, it's still under artificial light, get outside, and even better if you can flick your shoes off and stand on a bit of grass or something like that. It's something. It's helping to send that signal to your body that it is daylight. and to help to kind of reset that very misaligned circadian rhythm.
I think the other thing that's not talked about this is that the earlier you are in your career or the lower your economic status, the more likely you are to have an unhealthy relationship with light. And you've got to remember that's not by choice. Often when you are given a position in work, you don't have any choice about what light's provided or how much daylight's coming in. Even in a deep plan office in a really let's dream with me for a moment. That's a high-end lawyer in a big building in Sydney, Australia. Well, the seniors will have the offices around the windows, but all the new grads will be put in the middle, and they're the ones that are actually going to be doing the long hours. And I'm saying to those senior people that we need to do better for our people, and we should be investing in making sure they're getting the right light that works with their body clocks, or actually ensures their body clocks are properly aligned.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to help improve with productivity and everything else. But so tell me, Ralph, a little bit more about your Osin Loop, like, you know, how it works and so forth, because it's a very strange looking thing. I remember when I first saw it.
Yeah, okay. So probably can actually give a quick view of an Osin Loop right here. And that's actually in video
watching it on our
mode. I'll just turn it, hopefully it'll pick up the spectrum change. Basically, I'll just turn it back on. That's and turn on there if I get the camera angle right.
Yeah, so those watching us on YouTube will be able to see that it's it's kind of like a bit of a racetrack sort of shape, isn't it?
So I wanted to put something on the desk that starts a conversation. And the loop is signify of the ever looping cycle of night and day.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Okay. And so the idea is the Osin Loop is I started with the premise because I knew that this spectrum we need to properly get that signal into our eyes to work with those non-visual cells in our eyes, and that then gives us that proper body clock alignment to the day-night cycle. Happens to be around about the colour of blue sky. It's funny that, isn't it? Funny how those receptors that have this chemical in them that get turned on, if you like, during the day, well, it just happens to be the light that's about the same colour of blue sky. So I started, can I put a small piece of blue sky on everyone's desk? Now, if you look at the spectrum, and yeah, I'd love to be able to put graphics up here, but if you look at the spectrum of modern white LED, they have a real dip right where that blue sky spectrum is, and it's around about peaking, you know, these receptors in our eyes that contain this chemical melanopsin, they're sensitive at peak blue light at 490 nanometers. If you look at modern white LED spectrum, it's got a dip right where we need that. It does have a big peak of blue light, and I've heard some other really interesting people that have been on your podcast, or like Max Kilhane, talk about that peak blue light, but that's sitting down at 455 nanometers, so it's not in the right place. But it's great for visual because white light is made up of all the colours of spectrum. Now, that's full spectrum, and that's what visual light is. Think of a rainbow. So we've got all these different colours, and if you mix them together, that makes white light. And in our eyes, we have receptors for blue, green, and red. And if you look at this artificial spectrum made, they've all got a peak of blue, green, and red to make white light. But they've made it so that's the most efficient or efficacious light for human vision. But they didn't worry about this light we needed for our biology because they weren't thinking of that. The engineers, when they make these LEDs, they weren't thinking about it. And I don't know if you know much about how LEDs produce light, but the LED starts off, and this is a white LED. They're in our televisions, they're in our iPhones, they're in our computers, and they're in our overhead lights. They start off with a base colour light of blue at around about peaking at 450. It's like a royal blue colour, and then they dope phosphors on top, and that blue light excites the phosphors to give off give off white light, so that fills it out. That's why all of these LEDs have this peak of blue light, and this blue light, so we've got this blue light during the day, but it's in the wrong place for our biology. But for the first time really in human history, in our homes, on our screens, all the time at night, we've got a peak of blue light. So we've got a problem. We've got a day problem, not enough of blue light, and we're spending way too much time indoors.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
And then at night, we've got blue light for the first time. And this is why we really need to start having these conversations, and we need to increase this awareness. And then in a shift work context, it's just an absolute double whammy in that you're already shifting your circadian, so your body clock, so you're already shifting your cycle out of whack with the day-night cycle. And then we have all this light exposure, and now this light exposure has got blue light in it. And basically our brains, they can't make any sense of that. Our brains are making no sense of it. And that means our metabolic system's out of time, out of whack. And people often say to me, well, you know, what does that do to you? And the thing I can say to you is, if you've ever suffered jet lag, that's acute circadian disruption. That is your metabolic system's out of whack now for the day-night cycle, and you feel sick. And the evidence is that many of us have chronic form of circadian disruption. We're never quite right, and we know long-term this has serious health consequences.
Yeah. As I've sort of been delving down the topic, I suppose, particularly in the last few years, just learning more about how light controls every aspect of our biology. And just knowing that, because in the health space, there's so much talk about food and exercise and all this kind of stuff, and I'm not going to discount that.
No, it's all part of it.
Yeah, but again, are we shining the light too much over here, and we're kind of forgetting about over here? Again.
Light is everything, and you know. If you think about how we've evolved, and that means every living organism, it was to this day-night, this constant day-night cycle.
Yeah.
Now, so the Osin Loop, how does the Osin Loop, this small piece of blue sky that I put on your desk, it fills that dip in and targets those receptors in our eyes at a recommended amount, so expert consensus recommended dose, to ensure that we have proper body clock alignment. It's replacing what we'd get outdoors. Now, I'm not saying it's replacing all everything that's in sunlight, but I know I can target those receptors in our eyes, called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, with this light to give us the right amount. And there's a really interesting scientific paper that was released only in 2022, and it's from a multitude of experts and a multitude of organisations. I'm pretty sure Australia's represented. I think it's what's that university in Melbourne that does a lot of sleep research?
Not RMIT.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's on the top of my head.
And also Massey University in New Zealand, but all over the world. And it's called Recommendations for Daytime, Evening, and Nighttime Light to Best Support Physiology, Sleep, and Wakefulness in Healthy Adults. And they tell us how much light of this enacting light we need during the day. And it also recommends how little we have in the evenings and then before bed. And the Osin Loop will go and you can actually deliver each one of those recommendations without just our product. And it's also one of the first, it is the first light in the world that's not there to produce visual light. It's only there to give you what I would call this circadian light or biological light. It's not a visual light. It's not there to give you. We've got enough visual light. We should have enough visual light. We don't need that. This is just to go and fill in the gap. Yes, you can see it, but it's not there to help you see.
Fascinating. And I've just lost my train of thought for a second there.
Just to go back for you, then you asked about it's a weird looking thing. I wanted to make it look controversial, so it started conversations. What's that?
And it does that.
What's that? What And my hope has been that, and this has been borne out, that my customers would then be able to at least give a bit of a spiel on, hey, well, this is the light that's putting a bit of blue sky on my desk, and that's helping my body clock align. We're not getting this light in our offices here or wherever my workplace is. That's how I started with it. The Osin Loop shouldn't need to exist.
Yeah.
Because I could put the spectrum into the overhead lighting, but sad fact that it does. And because there's so many projects, we've just spent the last 10 years retrofitting all our offices and buildings with LEDs, that a product like the Osin Loop is going to be around for a long time yet, but it shouldn't have to exist because we can design buildings to not need a Osin Loop. We can deliver this.
Yeah, but as you say, though, at least it creates that conversation piece to sow the seed, going, oh, okay, why is this? And I know, I certainly know that you've the huge amount of science and research and everything that has gone into developing the Osin, Ralph, and just to kind of help our listeners understand, it does change colour depending on the time of day. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's actually an important part of this. And so people ask me, well, how long do I need the spectrum for? Well, in that recommendations paper, which is freely available, it's an open source document, they recommend all day. Then people go, what does all day mean? I've really thought about this. And there's not a lot of guidance on the timing and my industry, the lighting industry, but generally this has been a problem. So I came up with equinox timing. The only normalized day lengths we have around the whole planet is around the equinox, which is 12 hours day and 12 hours night. And if you want to think about even to
except if you're living in Alaska. Somewhere like that.
No, but at the equinox, which is March the 22nd or September the 22nd, Alaska has a normalised day, even at the poles. So the equinox is the normalised, the only times on the planet that we have a normalised day, and it's roughly 12 hours light and 12 hours day. So I've called my timing equinox, and what happens is the Osin Loop in the evening, so at night it's an amber, it's a really warm light with basically zero blue light in it.
Gotcha.
And then at around about the AM, it starts a 2-hour transition to its day mode. So it has an artificial sunrise. And the amber slowly changes through to that sky blue light, and by the AM it's in its bright blue light. And then at 4:30 starts its transition back to the night mode, so it's 6:30. I do this year round, so it might seem a bit weird in summer, but there's no evidence that a long artificial circadian rich day does anything in summer, but a longer circadian rich day, thinking back to Alaska, does a lot of good in our short winter days. And one of the things that's been a real surprise for me, because I've made this lamp to actually align people's body clocks, is the overwhelming anecdotal feedback I've had from my customers that it's uplifted them in winter. Brilliant. And this was completely unexpected for me. I do have supporting papers now that shows that it's a very effective way of actually treating SAD. So we use this, what I call low energy blue light. So that's one other thing I want to make clear with the Osin Loop. It's blue light, and blue light's had a lot of bad press. This is really low energy blue light, and you've got to remember as you go down the spectrum, if you like, that the blue energy gets higher and higher and higher, and ends up being UV. And UV, as you know, penetrates skin and does all sorts of things. This is really low energy. It's really safe, and in fact, there's evidence it's really good for eye health. Yeah, it's really very effective at lifting people up and at treating what it's clinically called sub-seasonal affective disorder. So that's not severe clinically diagnosed depression, but a lot of people feel down in winter. So it's definitely making an impact on it. And I never expected that to be part of this journey. And it just shows you how interlinked all these things are. They're all interlinked. Why would we get depressed? And if you think about it, in winter you're indoors all day. I think if you worked outside in winter, this seasonal affective disorder is not going to be a thing. But it's all part of our lifestyles and how we're living, how we're designing our buildings, and how we're modern society has basically made us.
Yeah, I mean, we've become so very disconnected with nature, and I think the further we move away from nature, the sicker we become. So if we can at least try to replicate it the best way. Just as you're talking, Ralph, I sort of think that, it could certainly benefit people that are working in, for example, a call center environment where there isn't a lot, like there's no windows, there's no natural light, but at least to have something like that sitting on their desk that helps with the timing when it kicks in, because I appreciate that you hook it up to your mobile phone so it knows where you are geographically, so it can work out when morning rise is and so forth. So it makes you feel like it's trying to kind of reset your circadian rhythm, even though you're stuck indoors in front of all these computer screens, answering phone calls or whatever it is. It's not giving off visual light, as you say, but it's designed to kind of help to improve your biology, at least replicate it. We know that nothing can replace Mother Nature, but at least you're giving it a good shot for an interim until we can fix our very dysfunctional workplace lightings.
Yeah, that's correct. So it's a personal supplementary circadian lighting device. And that's what part of that journey is. It's so hard to get the circadian light projects across the line, if you like. And, because of that history of doing visual light, the lack of knowledge and how modern buildings are procured, the people paying the bills don't inhabit them. and we think buildings are really expensive, but if you look at the lifetime of that building, the human capital cost is it's well over 90% of the cost of what their initial build cost was. The human capital cost, I think it's higher than that. I think it's 98%. I think the building is worth about 2% of, if you look at that capital cost, but we're not investing in those people as much as we should. And I think that's something we fundamentally need to change. And I think things have, there are things going the right direction. Like there's a real movement now for biophilic design. Evidence-based design is also really starting to get a foothold in certain sectors of the construction industry. And these are all positive, and all this just fits into that. All of these are around making our buildings healthier and better for people to actually inhabit, basically. And the same thing should be happening in our home. And I would encourage, just like the Osin Loop changes to a light that's amber with basically very little in the way of blue light. Think of firelight. I'd be doing that in our homes, and this is something we should definitely be doing. And if I was a shift worker, I would encourage those shift workers to look at some of the people now that are researching, like ArchiShift and people like that are giving timing regimes based, and advice on light for shift workers.
Absolutely. It's a tough gig without a shadow of a doubt. And I always say that people are really in survival mode, and I truly don't believe you can ever really thrive whilst working shift work, because we're not designed to do it. That's the crux of it. But you have to do what you can, at least, to help support your body for as much as you can. And as you also alluded to before, a lot of shift workers, when they start out, they can end up doing it for 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50 years. I interviewed a guy that drove trains for 50 years, loved his job. But yeah, it's certainly going to take its toll. So I think there has to be, as much as I'd love to see a bit of dual responsibility from the employer as well as coming across it, it's also the employee has to take on some responsibility as well. But it's having these conversations, what we're doing now, and hearing about different products that can benefit, which is great.
So one way, and I can't recommend light for shift workers, but others can. And if someone else that's way more knowledge than I recommends bright light at the end of your shift or at the start, and it's early in the morning, or whatever, and you can't get it, and I mean bright light like daylight, because sometimes I've seen these in winter. How do you do that? Well, then the Osin Loop definitely can help, and you can biohack the Osin Loop by moving its time zone.
Okay. Right.
So, yeah, and that's how. So my dream would be I'd work with someone that sets their schedule so that we can actually schedule the timings for an individual, but we're not there yet. But an individual could, and if you think about it, shift work is basically shifting your time zone.
Yeah.
There'll be somewhere in the world that if you're working a night shift, and you're in Australia, well, you're basically working a day shift somewhere in Europe. So you can shift it, and it can give you those light timings by moving your time zone to somewhere more like what you want or whatever those recommendations are. Because in the app, you just go and choose your time zone where you are in the world.
That's very, very cool. So where do you see, I guess, the building industry, lighting industry, circadian health industry go moving forward based on what you've sort of been seeing, right? It's 2024. What's it going to be like in 2034? I guess, what do you hope it's going to be like?
Well, I obviously have what I call traditional lighting businesses, and I say this, and it's true, but I will sell lights that are helping me fund a business like Osen that will do harm, but we all are. I would love to see in 2035 we're in a position that we were actually doing no harm. I don't think we'll be there in 10 years, if I'm honest. I will do everything I can to influence that. And it's not all bad news. We've just taken a really big order here in New Zealand for a big office building that is going to have the spectrum built into the lighting. And in the end, the client says, well, this is a no-brainer. I'm investing in my people. So there are things happening, but it's still way less than 1% of projects. Again, that building was owned and by the people that were going to tenant it. So I think one of the big problems we've got, and I don't think this will change really. I can try and work from my side, influencing on that, influence architects, engineers, but the day the customer or the tenant saying, is this lighting going to be healthy? Is this lighting is this going to be circadian lighting? Is this going to align my staff and my people's body clock?
Yeah.
Until we get to that point, I really don't think there'll be a lot of change, because then, unfortunately, in this world, just about everything is still, well, it is. It's driven by economics. If those building developers and they could see that they could get a little bit more out of the lease by providing lighting that actually aligns our body clocks correctly, then it becomes, that's going to become a no-brainer. And I've seen that happening in some with green buildings and things like that. So I think we can do it, but we're going to need a concerted effort, and we're going to, and I'll call out, there is a standard. It's actually, it is a private enterprise. It's called the Well Standard, and they do offer points for properly addressing circadian lighting. So there are some things happening. They're just not very well established in this part of the world, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I have heard though. I think Dr. Jack Cruz is an American neurosurgeon. I think he's trying to set up a new hospital in El Salvador that is very much taking into consideration light, because he's been kind of harping on about it for a long time of how important it is to our biology. So I think there's going to be some interesting developments occurring, and it's, I guess, sitting back and seeing how it all unfolds. And I guess, but right down to an individual basis, it's up to us. I look, knowing what I know now, I have to say, if I was offered a job in a windowless office, I wouldn't take it. I just don't think that that's helpful, particularly if you have to sit there, stuck in front of a computer for that time.
But if you're 25 years old and you need a job, and it's a great career opportunity,
for sure,
we've got to do better. And an interesting point, Audrey, you mentioned El Salvador, and this was a penny drop moment for me, because El Salvador's in a tropic country, in the tropics, and I thought this wouldn't be a problem in the tropics, right? It's just the way I thought. This is a lower latitude problem. This is something that's. And and you think this is a seasonal problem. Sure, it is worse in winter in our latitudes, but in tropical countries, the penny drop for me was in Singapore, where they're designing their building. People live indoors because they don't want to be out in the heat. They work in air-conditioned buildings, and because of the solar gain, they're putting a lot of treatments, a lot of shading, and they're actually cutting out. In fact, they like dark environments. And I'm looking around going, oh my gosh. And when you take into account they're doing that, plus the spectrums we're using, I think this is a huge problem even in tropical climates.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Just shielding them. The hotter the climate, the more you think Dubai. They jump out of the building, jump in an air-conditioned car, drive to a restaurant, get back in. The restaurant will be all darkened down. Singapore, El Salvador hospitals, they'll be cutting out light. It's a massive problem. So that, for me, when I was in Singapore and I looked at it, and with the knowledge I had, I'm like, oh my God, this is a global problem. It's a massive problem.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And glad that you mentioned the Middle East, who, interestingly enough, have one of the largest poor metabolic health and obesity populations in the world. Obviously, always indoors, always covered up as well. So even when they're outside for that brief moment in time, their body's not getting exposed to any sunlight to help with their circadian biology would improve those metabolic processes. So yeah, good point.
Countries and places like the Middle East, because of the high temperatures, they like cold color temperature light, and always, and particularly in an LED context, the colder the color temperature, the more blue light.
Yeah.
I didn't know that they had these were such health problems, but honestly, it doesn't surprise me, and that's what we're dealing with. I sometimes think people think I'm a bit nutty because I go on about light and its impact. I think some people like looking at this guy here as a complete loopy. The more you just have to start scratching and reading just a little bit, and it's almost like all roads lead to Rome.
Yeah. I think, I know you're not loopy. Or, again, pardon the pun. Yeah, I think there's a lot of us now that are starting to question so much. And the thing is, with light and sunlight in particular, it's free. And when we're talking about economics, I think we could do a whole podcast talking about that. But yeah, so it's been a great chat. Ralph, before we kind of wrap up, is there anything that you wanted to add to our conversation? I guess maybe any tips or advice for our listeners how to improve their or reduce the effects of their very circadianly disrupted lifestyle?
Well, yes. First thing is, you're right. Natural light is free and it's best, and it's where I always start. However, if you are 25 or maybe you're 35, or it doesn't matter how old you are, and you are in a position of work where you're not getting that light, well, talk to your employer, look at products like the Osin Loop, have a look at Osen, what we're doing. We can address it, and I know we're making a big difference for the people that are using them. The other thing is, I want to give we didn't really get into the science of this, and I think it's been well covered in a couple of other of your podcasts that I've listened to, and I'd like to give a call out to Dr. Max Calhane and Dr. Valerie Grande. That is the podcast 111 and podcast 118. I think they really do cover in depth the more of the how the metabolism works, and they're doctors, and one's an eye doctor, and the other one he's a general practitioner, I think.
Yeah.
And I think they really cover off in eloquent ways about how this is such a problem for our health. And I'd really encourage your listeners to, if they're interested in the subject and want to learn more, or they're a little bit doubtful or what, is just listen to those, and you'll understand that how light is impacting us in ways we're only just starting to understand. And I'd say that we only know a part of it at the moment, but I firmly believe that light is life, and with just changing little parts of it, we have no idea what the impact is back to the 20, 30, 40 years down the way. I really think it's something we need to start taking seriously and really consider.
Yeah, great advice. Interestingly enough, I've always been a bit of a sun lizard. I think I was a cat in my former life. I've always kind of wanted to gravitate to the sun. I love being in the sun. Yeah, and I think we need to start tapping into that intuition, those gut instincts a bit more.
There is obviously the paradox of that. I mean, I've had a skin cancer cut out. I've had a couple cut out now, and that's our problem, particularly in Australasia, where the certain times of the day the UV is so strong, particularly in summer. That's the paradox. And in fact, the advice we're giving everyone is to keep out of the sun. And I think we need to even look at that. And we've just got some problems. Yeah, that's how I'll finish up. But I think we can start changing things, and we can start learning, and we can make this better. But I think the way we're dealing with it now is fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've actually got a good podcast coming up as well, talking about the importance of building up a bit of a solar callus. What other things that actually potentially might be causing skin cancer as well. It's we're definitely spending too much time indoors and probably scaring our body each time we set out and spend too much time in it in the middle of the day.
Be it shift workers or people that are just interested in the subject, is in our devices they have, like Apple has night shift, Samsung Android devices, I forget what they call it. Make sure you use them. And I always say to people, why do the tech companies have those settings? I think they should be mandatory and it should happen automatically, but that's not the world we're in. But really encourage them, and that removes a lot of the the blue light. And I will say that Apple devices are better than Android at removing it. So
Oh, okay.
yeah. I get my spectrometer out and I do the measurements.
Hmm.
Apple are very good at taking the blue out. But yeah, really they run them at the minimum output, resolution you can, as far as illuminance. And yeah, if they should look warm or even orange.
Yeah.
Or use blue light blocking glasses, and it's doubly important for young people. Well, we're all spending a lot of time on our screen. I don't want to pick on young people, but the human eye, when it's young, the lens is very clear and is more susceptible than older people. The blue light.
Good point.
So as your cornea ages, it tends to discolor and yellow, which is a little bit of natural protection. But young people, they are absolutely really susceptible to blue light at night. So if you've got children, even adolescents, make sure, and you won't stop adolescents being on their screens, but let's try and get that blue light out of that, get it away from them. And I've seen evidence of doing that and adolescents sleeping and getting to bed that much earlier.
Yeah, which is pretty huge, teaching good habits right from the get-go. Well, terrific chat, Ralph. Before we go, would you mind sharing a little bit about if people want to get in contact with you, your website, and how they can perhaps reach out to you if they'd like to consider getting one of these for either their home or their office? How do they go about that?
Yeah, brilliant. So if you just go to our website, which is www.osinlight.com, you'll find there, you can contact, if you go to, there's a contact there, hello Osin Light, to either myself or one of my staff, really. You can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to message me if you've got any questions, or you can drop me a personal email, and that's just ralph@osinlight.com. So really easy to get hold of me.
Brilliant.
And I love interacting with people and answering questions. And if I can help, I'll help anyone any way I can.
Excellent. Lovely. Sound like you're a good human.
I try to be.
I'm sure you are. Well, I'll make sure to put all of those links in the show notes. I'll chase you up to in regards to that paper that you mentioned, that research paper as well. We'll put that all in, so if anybody wants to kind of delve in a little bit more, they know where to go. But again, thank you so much, Ralph.
I'll put that one there in also.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What's the title of that one?
The effects of low intensity blue light treatment compared to bright white light treatment in subsyndromal seasonal affective disorder. Basically, using a product just like the Osin Loop all day is as effective of trying to sit in one of these 10,000 lux retina burners for 15 minutes a day, so half an hour. Which I personally have issues with. I don't think it's great to be sitting in front of that white LED at such high levels.
Yeah.
Back to listening to Valerie Gunn de Grande about peaks of light. So yes. Anyway,
keeping it as close to natural as
keeping it more. Try and keep it more full spectrum. I think. Having this pulled out spectrum.
The rainbow colours.
Keeping how the eye evolved.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, Ralph, and thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Cheers.